We've done Fossil Box, and now it is time for Psychic Box. Now this is a deck that I have done for the channel before, utilizing Sabrina's Alakazam, whose Psylink power gives it access to all of your Psychic Pokemon's attacks. So the idea behind a Psychic Toolbox deck is fill your deck full of Psychic Pokemon, a whole bunch of 1 or 2 offs that have very useful attacks that you can channel through Sabrina's Alakazam. Did the Vending series provide enough extra Psychic tools to justify a revamp of this deck? I think so. If you watch my video on the Vending Spookify deck, then you understand why. Spookify is an amazing deck. This Psychic Toolbox is not trying to be Spookify, but Spookify does play a role in it. This Ghastly is too good to pass up as a potential attack contributor to Sabrina's Alakazam. Spookify is too good, so it's going to make its way into the deck. The Haunter, all the rest of that is going to be a no. Another addition is Vending Mewtwo, whose Psy Crush can be devastating if you're playing against an opposing Psychic deck like Spookify, but that is very situational. Instead, Super Psy is just another great backup coming off of a basic. For only 3 energy, you're dealing 50 damage. And then lastly, Vending Mime, who is in this deck for its Pokemon power rather than its attack. Neutral damage is really going to help out against all of those big normals, like your Chansey, your Lickitung, that are going to resist everything in this deck. That's going to resist Sabrina's Alakazam when it's trying to deal these huge chunks of damage. This is also going to help out when you're against opposing Promo Mewtwo's, Sabrina's Gengar, any other Psychic type that's going to be able to just wipe the floor with you. You can get rid of that weakness that's on Sabrina's Alakazam. Don't have to worry about it. You can just focus on dealing the hard numbers as long as you can keep Mime on your bench. Before we get into the deck list, I do want to mention that both of the Vending Kadabras have really fun, really useful attacks. Energy Shock for 2 energy is a really great attack. Not only are you getting 20 damage, but you're also really disrupting the game state. You're making it so your opponent does not want to attach an energy to their active Pokemon next turn. And then, of course, there's Psycho Panic Kadabra, which Psycho Panic is basically an OHKO on any Psychic Pokemon because you're also going to be hitting it for weakness. So you're hitting it for ×4 damage. And Blink, even though it's 3 energy, that's a little bit off the energy curve, but 30 damage and potentially preventing all damage next turn is a pretty good preservation attack. The problem with the Kadabras is that they're stage 1s, so you would have to run your Abras in addition to the Kadabras, and it gets a little muddy. It slows down the deck quite a bit to have stage 1s that you're relying on to get onto the field alongside your stage 2 Sabrina's Alakazam. I just wanted to emphasize that these are 2 very good Psychic cards with some really great utility attacks that Sabrina's Alakazam can use. They just didn't make it into this build of the deck. What does the build look like? Well, let's take a look. Obviously, at the very base of this deck is going to be Sabrina's Abra. I've gone with the one that has a little more HP, the 50 HP one. There are some other ones that have some better attacks on them. It doesn't matter a whole lot. I mainly just want some, turn 1 assurance that the Abra is actually going to last and not just get sniped off of the bench or something. So 3 copies of Sabrina's Abra with 50 HP and 2 copies of Sabrina's Kadabra. Now, the reason that I just don't go 3/3 Sabrina's Alakazam with Breeder is because this Kadabra's Life Drain attack is very useful, especially for only 1 energy. Now, it is off of a coin flip, but still potentially a 1 energy attack for Sabrina's Alakazam to use if you've got another Sabrina's Abra evolved up. 3 copies of Sabrina's Alakazam, and of course we're going to be running Breeder, that's why it's a 3-2-3 line. And for the rest of these are kind of just like your utility basics to spread out all these different types of attacks as much as possible. So we got Jungle Mr. Mime for its Meditate attack, which is a great follow-up to a successful Life Drain, but also to serve as a stall card for if this deck comes up against some really big high energy attacks that doesn't really have an answer for. You can always stall a little bit with Mr. Mime and Meditate. Got that Vending Mr. Mime for its ability. We talked about that in the intro. Promo Mewtwo for the energy absorption, just recycling those energy, getting them back into play, as well as Cyburn as being a solid attack on itself, although the Vending Mewtwo does have a better 3 energy attack. So across all of these, you're basically giving Sabrina's Alakazam some 2 and 3 energy drop attacks. Life Drain kind of counts as only 1, but Promo Mew is going to be in here for its Psy Wave attack as another answer for some high energy, big attacks on the other side of the field, as well as Devolution Beam. Because a lot of times, if you're racking up damage on something like a Blastoise or a Koga's Beedrill, you can use Devolution Beam, and that's a KO right there. So Mew is going to be more of a late game utility, where early game you're going to want that Ghastly. You want to Spookify for a couple of turns, keep your opponent from really getting their setup, and that's going to help this deck gain momentum very early on by just stopping your opponent from getting the cards that they need. By the time they do, you've already got your full setup. You've got a wide range of attacks you can start pulling from, depending on what the field is looking like. Draw power is split between Oak and Erica. Again, this is just draw power preference. And then I'm going to be running 3 copies of Good Manners, which is really quick search just to get those basics out of your deck, into your hand. That way you can start utilizing the attacks once your Sabrina's Alakazam is set up. You can just use Good Manners and search out the exact basic that you want out of the deck. For anything else you're needing to pull straight out of the deck on the turn you need it, you've got a couple copies of Computer Search. Speaking of, what you're usually going to be looking for is either a Pokemon Breeder or a Sabrina's Alakazam. Usually you got one or the other in your hand. You need both to really get it out onto the field. Computer Search is going to be a big help there if the Oak and the Ericas aren't getting you there. Pokemon Trader is also going to be super helpful for if you already do have a basic in your hand, but it's not the one you want. You can't really use Good Manners, so you got Pokemon Trader in here just so you can swap them out really quick. Works pretty much the same way. You're pulling the Pokemon you need when you need it. Because there are some higher retreat cost Pokemon in here, Alakazam included, got a couple copies of Switch, that way you can move them around, as well as a couple copies of Gust of Wind, so that you can pull out the Pokemon you need to knock out, get those early threats out into the active position so you can knock them out with your choice of attacks. Warp Point's kind of the middle ground between Switch and Gust of Wind. It's going to be very situational, so you got 2 copies of all 3 of those movement cards, I guess you would call them, just so you can use them as needed, which I guess is the overall theme of this deck, is use as needed. Got a full playset of energy removal in here, just for some disruption to keep your opponent from, really gaining more momentum than you. A Spookify is really going to help stop that, but at the same time you can keep them from getting too big of attacks off too early, especially if you don't have an Alakazam down on the field yet. Couple copies of Nightly Garbage Run just to recycle some of these Pokemon and use them over and over again, and then a couple copies of Resistance Gem. And you may say, why do we need Resistance Gem when we've got the Vending Mr. Mime that is basically a Resistance Gem for your bench? Well, sometimes that Mr. Mime is in your prizes. And also sometimes you need a counter gem to remove something that benefits your opponent off of the field. Resistance Gem is in here. It's not always going to be useful. That can be a throwaway card if it needs to be, but at the same time, sometimes your opponent's got a Chaos Gem or something out on the field that's really messing with your strategy, and you can just replace it with a Resistance Gem. Even if you've already got the Mime out there, it's not really going to matter. And then the rest of the deck's going to be filled out with pure Psychic Energy, all that purple. And that's the deck there. It's a pretty straightforward approach. Get out your Alakazam as soon as possible, get the basics you need. The trainer base, it has plenty of tools for that, and then just start using the attacks that you need per the situation. And these will be games of speed. You really have to get those Alakazams out quickly, mainly because of Muck. Muck is pretty big in this format. Muck shuts down this deck pretty hard, so you have to have the tools in place to knock out a Grimer before it can even evolve. If you do end up getting hit with a ton of energy removals and super energy removals, then it may be good to just have a Fossil Ghastly in your sideboard. That way you can get it in there pretty quick. This deck does need a little more 1 energy attacks going for it, just in case you are up against some heavy energy removal stuff. And Fossil Ghastly is just a great standalone Psychic card anyway, so it does fit into the deck very well. And there are a ton more Psychic Pokemon with very situational attacks that could benefit your strategy depending on how you want to lean with your particular toolbox. And I know you guys are going to have thoughts on this, so please let me know down in the comments what are your preferred Psychic types to run alongside Sabrina's Alakazam in your own version of a Psychic Toolbox. Also, chuck in some request decks down there. Let me know what your Vending series decks are. Or for any format, really. I'm always playtesting here and there across formats. So, thanks again for watching. Social media links down in the description. Bye-bye.